Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the campus of the University of Southern Mississippi as we continue to meet the coaches on our 2016 football coaching staff of Coach Jay Hobson. Today, we're going to spend some time with the offensive line coach for the Golden Eagles, Jack Wright. And Jack, I guess people always want to know a little bit about your background. Talk about, where you came from, what you were doing, how you wound up at Southern Miss.
Well, I grew up in Mississippi. My dad was a high school coach here, so we bounced around several big schools in the state. He was extremely successful, so he made several stops in his career. So I'm a Mississippi guy, kept up with not only Southern Miss, but all the Mississippi schools growing up. Went to South Panola High School, graduated there, had a lot of success, and played at Arkansas State. Played there for 5 seasons and enjoyed that. Came back and worked at a high school here in Mississippi for 3 years. And then on to Millsaps with David Saunders and Mike Dubose, and from there, Northwest Community College, at first offensive coordinator, and then a few years later on to head coach.
You've had a great background, I guess, starting with your dad. I mean, guys that have taught you the game of football. Where's your philosophy come from? Is it a mixture of all the guys you've been around?
Well, I grew up in a coach's house, so obviously my dad had a huge influence on my football philosophy, but I would say another guy that had a huge influence was Ricky Woods, and maybe not necessarily scheme and X's and O's, but how to deal with people and how to deal with kids and make the community, support you and have just a good support system around you.
You mentioned you were at Northwest Mississippi Community College. Had a great year last year. You guys win the national championship a year ago. So I'm sure that was a great situation for you. But the opportunity presents itself to come to Southern Miss. What was it about Southern Miss, Jay Hobson, that made you want to come and be a part of the Golden Eagles?
Really, there were 2 deciding factors for me that made it really easy. Number one was Jay, knowing his background, knowing the commitment that he's going to put into the program here, knowing the type of person that he is, knowing that he's the kind of guy that I would love to work with and work for. And then also I have a previous relationship with Shannon Dawson, our offensive coordinator, and just the chance, the opportunity to work with him again and being around him, I just think it would be a good fit based on working closely with those 2 people.
Talk about your philosophy a little bit in regards, first, I guess, to the offense as a whole, but then about playing on the offensive line. What's it take, and what do you like to do there offensively, and what do you like to see out of your guys up there on the line?
Yeah, every offensive line coach is going to preach being physical. We want to do that here. I think our guys are physical. Just watching them in the spring, watching how they stick their face in there and finish blocks and strain to the very end of plays. It was very pleasing, especially with some of the older guys that we had that have played a lot of football here. So very pleased at how physical they are. But, it's always important to protect the quarterback. So we spend a lot of time doing that. Pass protection techniques, blitz pickup, scheme in the pass protection system. That's the thing that gets all the headlines now is sacks given up, hits given up on the quarterback. So we spend a lot of time working on protecting the quarterback.
In the time that you have been a coach, how has that changed with the spread offenses and things like that? Is it harder or easier to protect the quarterback?
It's gotten harder. I think when the spread offense first, proliferated 10 years ago, 15 years ago, however back you want to take it, defenses were still, relatively simple. You saw a few simple zone coverages, primarily some cover 3 and cover 2, and there was a lot of grass to operate in. It was typically a 3 or 4 man rush and maybe a blitz occasionally. Now, because offensive are so multiple and there's some very creative schemes out there now, the defense feels like that they have to do that in order to be able to keep up. So it makes it a lot more difficult for the offensive line because now we have to react to all those different movements and all the new things that defensive coordinators are trying.
Do you have to find a little bit of a different offensive lineman, or are they changing down into the high school and junior college level? Do they have to be quicker, more mobile than maybe they were 5 or 10 years ago?
Well, you always want more athletic, not just linemen, but every position, So, yeah, you're going to be recruiting a more athletic kid, a longer kid, but you also want to be or a kid that can process quickly at the line of scrimmage because things are going to move, things are going to change. So the mental aspect of it has to be considered too.
Well, speaking of that, you've got one of the best, I think, in the country at analyzing and processing. That's the center, Cameron Tom. That's such a key position because he's basically the quarterback of that offensive line.
He is, and as spring went along, I was more and more impressed by his ability to process and take on new information and make sure that the guys around him knew who we were targeting defensively, who was free, knew where the quarterback's eyes were looking. So the more I'm around him, the more I work with him, the more I'm impressed with his ability to process the game.
When you look at some of the guys you got back, it's a mixture of guys that have played a lot, like a Cameron Tom, like a Brandon Farmer, like a Oliver Bates. All those guys have played quite a bit of football for the Golden Eagles. But then you're mixing in some guys who really haven't played yet at this level.
That's right, and that's by design too. You want to, if you're going to try to get those guys on the same level as some guys that have played a lot, you need to throw them in there with them and make those guys communicate at the same speed and with the same language as the guys that have played a lot. So that's by design a little bit. But I could tell the very first day of spring football that we had a group, especially the first group that went, with Nick in the spring practices. They were experienced and had played a lot of football.
Talk about the offensive football team. You mentioned Shannon Dawson. He's the new offensive coordinator, and you've been around him a little bit. What can Golden Eagle fans expect to see offensively? What kind of style of play?
Well, the Shannon Dawson that I remember from a few years ago, as his offensive line coach from about 10 years ago, I'd always have to remind him to run the football. To be honest with you, he's a guy that in his heart of hearts, he wants to throw the football. He wants to be aggressive. He wants to take advantage of what the defense is giving you on the second level. But the game's changed, and you've seen several guys that were like that 10, 12 years ago now realize that in order to win big conference games on the road in bad weather conditions, whatever the case may be, you've got to be physical and you've got to be able to run downhill. And so there's a lot more of that element in what he's doing now.
And even the Eagles have got a great situation at running back with Ito Smith and some guys like that. But at the same time, I think offenses have learned that those backs can become receivers too in that spread offense.
No, you're exactly right. I think at all levels of football, the running back is the one guy that can't get pressed at the line of scrimmage. If you look at kind of what's happening in the NFL and the SEC at the highest levels of football now, playing man-to-man is back in vogue. Well, the running back's 5-6 yards off the football in the shotgun, so he can't be pressed. So he gets a clean release every time. So I think offensive coordinators are now realizing that and taking advantage of it.
When you guys finish spring practice, and of course now you're in the summer workouts, and before we know it, the preseason practice are going to start. What are you going to work on? Where are some of the areas that you want your offensive linemen to work on to get yourselves ready for the season?
Like I mentioned before, pass protection. To me, that's what we're taking advantage of this time of the year for, is to be able to recognize fronts, to recognize movement, and try to get our hat on the most dangerous rushers.
You said you've been familiar with Southern Miss. You've lived in the state of Mississippi basically all your life, so you've kept up with all the schools, but Southern Miss is where you are now. What do you remember about Southern Miss? I'm sure you've probably been at a game or two over the years here at Roberts Stadium. When you think of Southern Miss football, what stands out?
I think of the nasty bunch. I think of defenses flying around. I think of hard hitting. I think of players that may be an inch short but are just as good as anybody else that's playing in the country. So that's what I think about, guys that go out and work hard and earn it, that will hit you. I still think of anywhere, anybody, anytime, right? I mean, I remember that being the slogan. It may still be, but that's what I remember about Southern Miss.
What are you looking forward to? The season, as we talk, is about 2 months away, about 60 days away. What are you looking forward to the start of the season and the 2016 season?
I'm looking forward to getting on the plane and going to the first game. I think that'll be a lot of fun. We're at that point of the process, it's all work. You've got about 7 months of work going into the first game. So to me, getting on the plane, going on a trip to go play in a big stadium, that's kind of the first big reward that the guys get for going through all the pain.
Jack, we appreciate it. Thanks for giving us some time. Welcome to Southern Miss. Glad to have you part of the Southern Miss family. So keep up the good work, and we'll see you again real soon.
Thank you. We're excited to be here.
All right, that's Jack Wright. He is the offensive line coach for the Golden Eagles as we continue to meet the coaches, the brand new coaches here at the University of Southern Mississippi. More to come from here on the campus of Southern Miss.